In 2007, the co-CEO of BlackBerry held up an iPhone and laughed. Not smiled, not smirked, laughed. Mike Lazaridis, the man who built the most powerful smartphone company on earth, looked at Apple's new device and said it would never work. No physical keyboard, terrible battery life, and the price? $499 for a phone? Who would pay that? He called it a toy. 3 years later, BlackBerry was the most valuable tech company in Canada. Their phones were in the hands of Barack Obama, Wall Street bankers, and Fortune 500 CEOs. The word BlackBerry had become a verb. People didn't check their email, they checked their BlackBerry. 8 years after that laugh, BlackBerry's phone business was dead. Completely, totally gone. This is Silicon's strategy, and today we're asking one question. How do you go from being so dominant that the President of the United States refuses to give up your phone to being completely irrelevant? The answer starts with that laugh. To understand how BlackBerry fell, you first need to understand just how untouchable they seemed. BlackBerry didn't just make phones, they built an empire on a single powerful idea: email in your pocket. In 1999, when everyone else was still using pagers and desktop computers, BlackBerry put real-time email into a device you could carry anywhere. For business professionals, this wasn't a gadget, it was a revolution. By the mid-2000s, BlackBerry had over 50% of the U.S. smartphone market. Their devices were considered the gold standard of corporate communication, secure, reliable, and addictive. Dangerously addictive. The nickname wasn't BlackBerry, it was CrackBerry. Lawyers answered emails at midnight, bankers replied to clients from hospital waiting rooms, executives checked messages during their own wedding receptions. BlackBerry hadn't just built a phone, they had rewired human behavior. And at the center of it all were two men: Mike Lazaridis, the visionary engineer who invented the device, and Jim Balsillie, the aggressive businessman who sold it to the world. Together, they ran BlackBerry as co-CEOs, an unusual structure that would later become one of the company's biggest problems. But in 2006, they were kings. Then came January 9, 2007. Steve Jobs walked onto that stage in San Francisco and changed everything. While the world watched in amazement, Mike Lazaridis watched in something else entirely: contempt. His reaction wasn't fear, it wasn't curiosity, it was dismissal. Lazaridis had built his entire career on one principle: the network couldn't handle what Apple was promising. Streaming video, rich internet browsing, a full touchscreen interface, all of that required enormous amounts of data, and in 2007, the wireless networks simply weren't for it. He was technically correct, and it didn't matter at all. Because Steve Jobs wasn't selling a phone for 2007, he was selling a phone for 2010, for 2012, for a future that Lazaridis couldn't or wouldn't see. BlackBerry's leadership made a catastrophic mistake. They evaluated the iPhone on the terms of the world that existed. Jobs had built it for the world that was coming. Here's where the story becomes genuinely painful. BlackBerry wasn't blind. They saw what Apple had done. Inside the company, engineers were alarmed. Some executives pushed for an urgent response: a touchscreen device, a modern operating system, a consumer-friendly interface. They were ignored. Lazaridis believed deeply, almost religiously, that BlackBerry's keyboard was its soul, that the physical keys were not a feature, they were the product. Business users needed to type fast, to feel the keys, to reply to 200 emails a day without looking at the screen. A touchscreen, in his mind, was a step backward. And so, BlackBerry did something extraordinary. They watched Apple sell 1 million iPhones in 74 days and decided their answer was a better keyboard. Not an app store, not a modern browser, not a consumer strategy, a better keyboard. It was the most expensive miscalculation in the history of mobile technology. What followed was a slow-motion catastrophe that BlackBerry could see happening and couldn't stop. The iPhone was followed by Android. Suddenly, there wasn't one touchscreen competitor, there were hundreds of devices from Samsung, HTC, LG, and Motorola, all running a platform designed for apps, media, and the open internet. BlackBerry responded with something called BlackBerry 6, then BlackBerry 7,
each one a modest improvement on what came before, each one completely missing the point. The real war wasn't about hardware anymore. It was about ecosystems. Apple had the App Store. Android had Google Play. BlackBerry had App World, a digital ghost town where developers didn't bother to build because the users weren't there, and users didn't come because the apps weren't there. It was a death spiral, and everyone inside BlackBerry could see it. By 2011, BlackBerry's market share had collapsed from over 50% to under 10%. The stock had fallen more than 75% from its peak. Employees were leaving, developers were abandoning the platform, and the two men at the top, Lazaridis and Balsillie, were still arguing about strategy while the building burned. In 2012, BlackBerry made its last real bet. They fired their co-CEOs, brought in a new leader, rebuilt their operating system from scratch, launched something called BlackBerry 10, a modern, elegant platform that reviewers actually praised. The reviews didn't matter. By the time BlackBerry 10 arrived, the war was over. iPhone users weren't switching. Android users weren't switching. The app gap was now a canyon. WhatsApp, Instagram, Snapchat, none of them came to BlackBerry 10. And without those apps, no consumer on Earth was going to choose a BlackBerry. The new CEO said it himself. We launched the best BlackBerry ever, and nobody cared. In 2016, BlackBerry announced it would stop making phones entirely. From 50% of the US smartphone market to zero in less than a decade. So what actually killed BlackBerry? Three things, and they're not what most people think. First, they confused their customers with their market. BlackBerry knew their business users. They understood them perfectly. But they completely missed the shift happening beneath them. Consumers were becoming the decision makers. When employees started bringing iPhones to work and demanding IT support for them, the corporate fortress BlackBerry had built became irrelevant overnight. Second, arrogance masquerading as expertise. Lazaridis wasn't stupid. He was one of the most gifted engineers of his generation, but his technical expertise became a cage. He knew so much about how networks worked that he couldn't see how consumers felt. And in the smartphone era, feelings beat specs every single time. And third, two captains, one ship, no direction. The co-CEO structure that had worked brilliantly in BlackBerry's growth years became a disaster in the crisis years. Lazaridis wanted to protect the keyboard. Balsillie wanted to license the software. They pulled in opposite directions, while Apple and Google ran straight past them. Here's what I want you to take away. BlackBerry's co-CEO laughed at the iPhone in 2007, not because he was foolish, because he was so certain of what he knew that he couldn't see what he didn't. That laugh cost $83 billion in market value. It cost 85% of their workforce their jobs. It cost millions of loyal users the product they were addicted to. The most dangerous moment for any company, any person, is not when they're struggling, it's when they're winning. Because winning feels like proof. It feels like evidence that you understand the world better than everyone else. BlackBerry was winning, Nokia was winning, Blockbuster was winning. And then the world changed, and they were still playing the game they had already won. Nokia's CEO cried when he signed the papers to sell his company. We don't know if Mike Lazaridis cried, but we know what he said in 2007. He called it a toy. Subscribe to Silicon Strategy because the difference between the companies that survive disruption and the ones that disappear is almost never talent or money or technology. It's whether they can laugh at themselves before the world laughs at them. I'll see you next week.